It was a cold, quiet night at the gas station where I worked. The clock on the wall showed 2 a.m., and the only sounds were the hum of the coolers and the occasional car passing by on the empty road. I was sitting behind the counter, trying to keep myself awake by reading a magazine. The gas station was always slow at this hour, and I was looking forward to the end of my shift at 3 a.m. Suddenly, the chime above the door rang, announcing the arrival of a customer. I looked up and saw a man walk in. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood up, casting a shadow over his face. Something about him made me feel uneasy, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way he moved so deliberately and slowly, or the way he seemed to be looking around the store with too much interest. He walked up to the counter and asked for a pack of cigarettes. His voice was low and raspy, sending a shiver down my spine. I reached behind me and grabbed a pack, placing it on the counter in front of him. He didn't pick it up right away. Instead, he pulled out a crumpled $10 bill from his pocket and handed it to me. As I took the money, our hands briefly touched, and I felt a jolt of cold run through me. I rang up the purchase and gave him his change, which he stuffed into his pocket without counting. He picked up the cigarettes and then, as if remembering something, asked if he could also get some gas. I nodded and asked how much he wanted. "Just $20, he said. I punched the amount into the register and handed him a receipt. "Thanks," he said, still in that unsettling voice. He turned and walked out of the store without another word. I watched him through the window as he filled up his old beat-up car. There was something off about him, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just encountered someone dangerous. After he drove away, I tried to go back to my magazine, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept drifting back to that man and the strange feeling he had left me with. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting him to come back. The rest of my shift dragged on slowly, and when my relief finally arrived, I was more than ready to go home. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a news alert from the local station. Groggily, I picked up my phone and saw the headline, "Gas station robbed, attendant brutally assaulted." My heart started pounding as I read the article. The robbery had happened just an hour after my shift ended, at a gas station only a few miles away from where I worked. The description of the suspect matched the man who had come into my store, tall, thin, wearing a dark hoodie. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized how close I had come to danger. The news report said the attendant had been badly beaten and was in critical condition at the hospital. The suspect had taken all the money from the register and had disappeared into the night. The police were asking for any information that might help catch him. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, replaying my encounter with the man over and over in my mind. I kept thinking about the way he had looked at me, the cold touch of his hand, and the unsettling feeling he had left me with. I wondered if he had been planning to rob my gas station too, but had changed his mind for some reason. Maybe he had been scoping out different places, looking for the right moment to strike. That night, I had to go back to work. But I was more nervous than I had ever been. Every time the door chime rang, I jumped, expecting to see that sinister stranger again. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I kept imagining what might have happened if he had decided to rob my store instead. A few days later, I saw his face again, this time on the front page of the local newspaper. The police had caught him after he tried to rob another gas station. He had been involved in a high-speed chase and had crashed his car, ending up in the hospital with serious injuries. The photo showed his face clearly for the first time. His eyes were cold and empty, and there was a twisted smile on his lips that sent a shiver down my spine. As I looked at the picture, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions: relief that he had been caught, fear at how close I had come to being one of his victims, and a lingering unease that I couldn't quite shake. The memory of that night and the sinister stranger who had come into my store would stay with me for a long time. Working at the gas station was never the same after that. I was always on edge, always looking over my shoulder, and always wary of late-night customers. The world seemed a little darker, a little more dangerous, and I couldn't help but feel that a part of my innocence had been lost forever. It was a dark, cold night when I got the call for a food delivery. I work as a delivery driver for a small restaurant in town. This call was different. The address was far from the town, near the forest. I had never delivered food to that area before. I put the food in my car and started driving. The road was long and empty. There were no streetlights, only the headlights of my car cutting through the darkness. Trees lined both sides of the road, their branches reaching out like long fingers. The wind blew through the trees, making eerie sounds. As I drove further, the houses became fewer, and the forest became thicker. I checked the address again. It was a house at the edge of the forest. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I told myself it was just another delivery. After driving for what seemed like forever, I saw a small dirt road leading into the forest. The sign had the same name as the address on the order. I turned onto the dirt road. My car bounced over the rough path, and the trees seemed to close in around me. It was so dark that I could barely see a few feet ahead. Finally, I saw a small house at the end of the road. The house looked old and run down. The paint was peeling, and some of the windows were broken. There was a dim light coming from inside. I parked my car and took the food out. As I walked to the door, I noticed how quiet it was. There were no sounds of animals or insects, just the sound of my footsteps on the wooden porch. I knocked on the door. There was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still no answer. I felt uneasy. I looked around and saw no signs of life. I decided to leave the food on the porch and go back to my car. Just as I turned to leave, the door creaked open. A tall, thin man stood in the doorway. He had pale skin and dark, sunken eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He stared at me for a moment before speaking. I handed him the bag, and he took it without saying anything. I turned to leave, but then he gestured for me to come inside. I didn't want to go inside, but something in his eyes made it hard to refuse. I stepped into the house. The inside was just as old and creepy as the outside. The walls were covered in old wallpaper, and the furniture was covered in dust. The air smelled damp and musty. I sat down in a chair in the corner. The man disappeared into another room. I heard him talking to someone, but I couldn't make out the words. After a few minutes, he came back with another person. It was a woman, just as pale and tired-looking as the man. They watched me closely as I sat there. The silence was heavy, pressing down on me. I wanted to leave, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. They offered me some tea, which I accepted. The tea was bitter, and I struggled to finish it. They kept watching me, their eyes never leaving my face. I asked how long they had lived there. The man started talking about the house in the forest. His voice was low and monotone, and I found it hard to concentrate on his words. The woman just nodded along, her eyes never blinking. The longer I sat there, the more uneasy I felt. I noticed strange things about the room. There were old photographs on the walls, but the faces were blurred and hard to see. The furniture looked like it hadn't been moved in years. There was a heavy, oppressive feeling in the air. I tried to stand up, but my legs wouldn't move. My heart started to race. I looked at the man and the woman, but they just stared back at me with blank expressions. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. The room started to spin, and the edges of my vision began to blur. Suddenly, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the cold, hard floor. The room was dark, and the only light came from a small flickering candle in the corner. The man and the woman were gone. I struggled to my feet, my head pounding. I felt weak and disoriented. I stumbled towards the door, my heart racing. The door was closed but not locked. I pushed it open and stepped out into the cold night air. The forest was dark and silent. I made my way back to my car, my legs feeling like they could give out at any moment. I got into my car and started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness, and I drove back down the dirt road. I didn't look back at the house. I just wanted to get as far away from there as possible. As I drove back to town, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man and the woman following me. The road seemed longer on the way back, and every shadow looked like it was hiding something. When I finally reached town, I parked the car and sat there for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart. I told myself it was just a strange, creepy experience, but deep down, I knew something was very wrong with that house in the forest. I never took another delivery to that area again. The memory of that night still haunts me, and sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I can still feel their eyes watching me. When my dad was around 50, he got an African gray. He always loved parrots his whole life, so I was happy for him to get one after his retirement. He named the bird Mango. My dad taught Mango a whole vocabulary of words, and he actually trained him to understand the meaning behind certain words like hello, what's up, food, thank you, good, and a few others. My dad passed away at 70, and with that came the time to figure out, among my siblings and me, what would happen to Mango. My brother and sister didn't want the responsibility of taking Mango into their homes. Plus, their spouses were against it too. But I couldn't bear the idea of giving him away to a new home. Mango was, and is, one of my last connections to my dad, in a sense, that was his best friend. So I decided I would take him into my home. I put his cage in the den of my house. My house doesn't have a basement, so the den is considered the lowest level of the house. Mango is a moderately noisy bird. He could be a chatterbox some hours of the day, usually earlier on, but later in the day and at night, he quiets down. When he's too noisy, I'll throw a blanket over his cage, and that normally quiets him down. I watch TV in the den at night to keep him company, then around 10, I'll migrate to my room to let him go to sleep. That's pretty much the backstory behind Mango. I've been taking care of him for 2 years now, so I know exactly how he behaves and when he's acting out of the ordinary. Speaking of out of the ordinary, there was one night in December, around 10:30 p.m., that Mango started making sounds while I was trying to sleep. I sleep with the door open since I live alone and need to be able to hear anything if something's going on in the house. Hearing him making his squawking noises past dark, especially this late at night, was unusual beyond doubt, and something was irritating him. I went down to the den to see what was bothering him. He was wide awake on the lower perch of the two in the cage. He looked at me and was saying things like, "Hello," and "What's up," and his name, all the while he was nodding his head up and down, moving his whole body in the process as if he were dancing. I tried to feed him, but he didn't eat, so I covered him with the blanket, hoping he would stop. I was in the kitchen when I stopped inside because he was still making the noises, and I had a feeling he wasn't going to stop. Having work the next day, I couldn't afford to lose sleep because of him. I really didn't know what to do. I'm still, to this day, not exactly a bird expert. I went back downstairs and uncovered him. He was still doing his little dance, popping his head and body, and making his distress sounds. It didn't click with me until I thought I heard something in the pantry closet a few feet away from his cage. I walked over to it and hovered my hand over the light switch to the pantry, which was outside of the door. The door has one of those big glass panels that many pantry doors have. So when I flicked the light switch, I saw the outline of a body on the inside. My flight or fight response kicked in, and I chose fight. I opened the door, screaming, trying to get my adrenaline rushing, and I grabbed the man in the pantry closet out and threw him to the floor. He tried to fight back, but I easily overpowered him and had him in what I could best describe as a choke hold. He was a man in his 50s, looking homeless, with the smell to match it. I yelled at him, "Who are you? Why are you in my house?" He tried grabbing my face, possibly to gouge my eyes or something, but I continued to wring his neck and punch him. During all this, Mango was going berserk in his cage. When the man on the floor seemed weak enough, I literally sprinted for the nearest phone and came right back, keeping him on the ground while I called 911. The man was taken to jail, but he had no ID on him. Nothing. He was homeless and had nothing to his name. As such, he was considered what some people call judgment-proof, meaning even if I tried to sue him, I wouldn't get anything from him. He had raided my pantry closet that night and had opened jars of peanut butter, boxes of cookies, and crackers and all sorts of other boxed and canned foods. If it weren't for my dad's parrot, I don't know what else that man would have taken or done in my house. I'm grateful for Mango, and I like to think part of my dad is watching over me in that bird. This was like 15 years ago now. When I was a kid, I was with my best friend Conal at some abandoned family resort or bungalow colony type place in New York. It was off a main road and then down a private dirt path driveway entrance. It was a rather large property with a bunch of old abandoned buildings, including at least 10 small bungalows, a main hall, a few bathroom stations, and an indoor pool house. Along with that, there was an outdoor pool, a shuffleboard area, and a kids' playground. Everything was old, run down, and with tall, overgrown grass growing over it. We found this place accidentally one time walking down Route 209, but we didn't explore it that day. We came back another night. By the time we went, it was past sunset, the sun was kissing the sky goodnight. It was getting very dark, but we didn't want to come during the day in fear of getting caught and charged with trespassing. We brought along walkie-talkies and flashlights to communicate with each other when we'd split up. We started looking around the bungalows together. Most of them looked the same and were relatively small, 1 or 2 beds each, a small kitchen, and 1 bathroom each. Some of them had these little living room areas. Halfway through these bungalows, I split off from Conal because he was moving kind of slow. I tried to enter the building that looked to be the main hall or office or something, but every entrance was locked. I walkie-talkied Conal to tell him that the big building was locked, but he didn't walkie-talkie back. I wondered if I was out of range from where he was. 2 minutes later, I found myself at one of the 2 bathroom buildings. It was probably a 400 square foot building. There were no doors to the building, though. It was unusual. It just had 2 big openings, one for the men's room, one for the women's room. I remember the signs being faded and worn out looking. Then, I saw these red tracks on the dirty old concrete bathroom floor. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say they looked like bloody footprints, but I couldn't explain what these red marks could be then, and I still can't say for certain now. Regardless, it was pitch black inside that bathroom around that corner, and that was the first building I was scared to enter. I tried walkie-talking to Conal again, hoping he was in range this time. I pressed the button on the walkie and said, "Yo, where are you?" When I let go, I heard the beep sound that the receiving walkie makes after getting a message from inside the bathroom. It gave me a near heart attack. Then, I thought Conal must already be in there, hence the red-looking footsteps. I called his name, and it echoed into the bathroom. I was actually about to step into the bathroom, thinking he was hiding from me, pranking me, when I heard Conal's voice call out from the distance behind me. Outside in the darkness of the night, I heard him getting closer. I couldn't see him in the dark, but he obviously saw my light, so I yelled back, "I found your walkie-talkie." I started stepping into the bathroom, but then he said back, "Don't go in there." I never went in there. This is when I turned around and hurried right out of there. I pressed and released the talk button really quick on my walkie, causing the beep again from inside that pitch-black women's room. Conal and I looked at each other for half a second and then began dashing in the direction we came. We made it back to Route 209 and had to stop to catch our breaths. This is when Conal told me that inside one of the bungalows he went into, he tried walkie-talking me, but I wasn't answering, meaning we must have been out of range. But then he heard a noise from the living area of the bungalow. As he turned around, his flashlight revealed an older woman almost running towards him. He dropped his walkie-talkie and flashlight and ran out from the bungalow. He ran in the dark and hid, refraining from making noise in fear of being followed. He hid for a questionable amount of time before looking around and seeing my flashlight across the field over at the bathrooms. The most likely explanation to me was that some cracked-out drug addict was hiding or living in that abandoned bungalow. For whatever reason, she lunged at Conal and picked up his walkie-talkie. What she was doing in that bathroom, who knows, maybe drugs, maybe the bathroom in the bungalow didn't work. But what I don't know is why there was a trail of what looked like blood in there. Those are my theories, but I can't explain all of it away, and that's the scariest part. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.